morning, guys. So hopefully everything is going well for you all. As I just, here and there, obviously I haven't made a video in a while, but here and there I get my ideas of just, this would be a good video to make. So for this one, we're specifically going to talk about, it's transmissions, right? Specifically the 4L60, that one. That one, a lot of people, it's a love or hate on that transmission. Just because, is it buildable? Yes. From a factory standpoint, is it as strong as most people would like it to be? No, it's not. It can't do much, right? So that's some of the flaws of that transmission. It's relatively cheap to rebuild or buy a brand new one because they're everywhere. They were in so many cars. Now, I'd say this. I think there's a little bit of misconceptions with some 4L60s. And the ones I'm going to specifically talk about are off of the C5s, the specific SS Camaros of that time period. So the Catfish Camaros. So the SS with the LS1s, and the last one would be the Firebird, right? The Pontiac Firebirds, specifically the one with the WS6. And possibly some of the early Pontiac GTOs before they switched to the LS2s, but those ones normally had a 4L65, right? They kind of tried to sway away from it after what happened with the other three. So, but specifically, I'm going to talk about just the F bodies and the C5. Now, what's different about those compared to most 4L60s, like the other ones, like the vehicle that you're seeing in this video, my Tahoe, right? This has a regular 4L60, right? The big difference, obviously, is all three of them, not just the Corvette, all three of them have Corvette servos. That's just the way they were. And so obviously, if anyone knows anything about these 4L60s, those servos are extremely helpful for these transmissions. They are pretty much, to most people, whoever decides to own a car with a 4L60, most people will probably tell you, even if you're going to keep that vehicle relatively stock, I think most people will probably tell you to do two things. Probably put a servo at it and throw a cooler at it, right? Anything after that, you pretty much just have to drive it normally, Like, don't try to throw this thing in from, when you're backing up and throw it into drive. Don't throw it into drive while the car is still in motion, because you will destroy that sun shell. That was probably some of the weakest links of this transmission, was the sun shell. And here comes to the next one. The sun shell itself on the 4L60s, that the C5s and the F bodies were at their highest trims. After a certain point, all of them had strengthened internals. And this is usually after 2001 to 2004, specifically for the C5s. For the F bodies, they pretty much got it until they ended. So pretty much they only had it where the 4L60 was, stronger. I'm not gonna say it can handle X amount of power now because of that. It can't, okay, but it's more than what it was. And I think that's common misconceptions, because most people think that the transmissions that were thrown into those cars were the same as these in terms of strength wise internally. It's not. Just they're close, but they are different. those ones can handle a little bit more. Now, for sun shells were strengthened. Anything internally, clutch packs, input shaft, all that stuff. Obviously, valve bodies were obviously changed to accustom those cars and what they're supposed to be. Right, their valve bodies in those cars are a little bit different compared to what we see in pretty much every other car that has a 460. But for good reason. You see those cars, F bodies, Corvettes. They're pretty much supposed to be GM at that time. That is their staple of vehicles right there. That's their sports cars. That's what they do. And they can probably handle a little bit more power, right? Like, I think you could be able to upgrade a couple things. Obviously, after you do certain things to help that force, you're gonna if you have one of those cars with that transmission, you're pretty much gonna have to really focus in on not even the engine itself. You're gonna have to focus in on the transmission and take away its biggest killer, heat. Those three cars were, the way they were designed, they are not the best at cooling off the car. All right. Obviously, these engines were designed to run hot. The automatic versions, again, they're designed to run hot. So the coolant going as high as it does, it will naturally raise the temperature of the transmission, because the automatic versions have the transmission hoses, like most cars, most automatics, where it's built into the radiator. That radiator is there to heat up everything, and after a certain point, it's going to be there to try to maintain optimal temperatures. But with the way those cars were set up, they can struggle to get air going, right? Especially the C5s, just because C5s are more bottom breathers than like most normal cars, where it's to the front and to the center grills. All right, that's why you have that air dam, because it's going to redeflect, go back up into the radiator, and go from there. Which, pros and cons to that, right? Pros and cons. And then the other one, I always see people say that, those cars are sluggish because of, just a sluggish feel. So people always recommend maybe getting a tune or something of that matter. The thing is, I think if you really look at the gear ratios of the 4L60s, they have long gears, right? They have long gears. They're perfect for what you need, or close to it. I'm not gonna say spot on perfect, but they're pretty good, right? They're good gear range, like good ranging on the gear ratios. I think the thing that lets it down for those cars is the final drive. The differential itself. The differential ratio is what kind of lets it down. Again, obviously there's versions of them where they had a little bit sportier editions, but I think if you want to really have it be less sluggish, have a little bit more fun with it, where it feels like it's at least doing something. All right, it doesn't feel like it's just moving along. All right, make it feel like a sporty car. Like, I know you're probably gonna say, just if you're gonna try to do all this, you should have just bought the T56. Then you wouldn't have to do all this, which is true, right? True, but I'm not gonna sit here and ignore the fact that those cars exist. Right? They have 4L60 variants. There are ways to make those 4L60s relatively fun. Like, power wise, you can probably push out to the tires. At that point, you can probably get close to 340, 350, right? With what the stock transmission is, because I don't think that transmission can handle more than 400 at the crank on torque. Like, I don't think it can do much more with the way they're set up. I know they're always rated at 360. and yada yada. But I think those later versions, I believe, can handle close to 400 at the crank. Torque is what also is the other thing that can kill transmissions. Now, with the fact that, you know, some people will always say that T56 this and that, okay, right? There's not a lot of people. If people own that car, there's not a lot of people who will be willing to sell that car, right? Because the T56 variants, that's about as close to bulletproof as you get with that car. Close. I'm not gonna say there's no car is ever bulletproof. You're gonna have to change something at some point. The engines themselves are stout. Transmissions, you know, eventually, at least on manual transmissions, some of them just have to get changed, right? Clutches and whatnot, they wear out. Same thing for autos. Eventually, at some point, the clutch packs need to be changed and yada yada. So, but with the way those are set up, I think the biggest one, I think, to change, to make it more fun, I guess, with a 4L60, to make the 4L60 feel more alive. Because, yeah, it shifts, like, it's gonna feel like it shifts relatively slow because of the final drive, but I think switching the biggest one, which is the most probably expensive one of them all, is getting a new differential, like a full-blown diff swap, and changing that final drive rear ratio. Okay, now from factory, the sportiest one, like the sports car variant, I guess, of the C5. The C5 had two gear ratios. It was like a 278 and a 315. 315 was obviously the more, basically their closest thing to what I can compare to, basically their Z51. And that's the way I'll compare that, right? Because the gear ratios got shortened up a little bit, or not gear ratios, the shift points, because of that final drive being where it's at. So the car feels a little bit more alive, but it's not what the T56s are, right? The T56s, all three of them, have a final drive ratio of 342. But also 6-speed manuals. So, different thing. Now, I'll say this, you throw a 342 at a 4-speed vehicle, that thing's gonna feel like a rocket. It's gonna feel insane. Like, I would say, I think the only, like, at the highest for me, I would say probably 373s would be a good area. I don't think much more than that would be, at least for street ability. I mean, you can go to 410, that's up to you. But for me personally, I think 342s would be a perfect area for that. If you really want to go a little bit more, just because 373s, I think, would be, you know, pretty good at your peak, to really make that transmission feel alive and not sluggish is the words that get described about that transmission. But I think 342s would be probably a best bet in terms of switching it, because so 315s on the Corvettes feels quicker, but not, it still gets considered to be sluggish, especially for the Corvette. You know, that's the GM's top dog. F-bodies, specifically only the SS and the WS6, actually had a different gear ratio. They had 323s. So theirs kind of is more usable around town and whatnot because of their gear ratio. So it feels a little bit more alive. Just a little bit. But obviously, pricing points and differences and difficulties, whatever the case may be, it'll be difficult, I think more difficult on the Corvette to do a diff swap than it would be on the other two vehicles. Because step one, Corvette has a torque tube, guys. C5s. That uses torque tubes. That's great. You know what that means? The transmission and differential are mounted together in the back. So that's a great start. You can take the diff off, obviously, but honestly, they're not like welded on together. You can take it off, but it's a little bit more of a interesting task to take off that diff compared to the F bodies. F bodies is like most normal cars. Drive shaft, transmission is bolted onto the engine in the front. Most of the weight will be at the front of that vehicle. All right, the only thing at the back at that point is literally the differential for the rear tires. So it'll probably be a little bit easier, and if you don't know how to do it, significantly cheaper if you have someone else do it, to do it on the F bodies. It'll be significantly cheaper, just because I think labor and whatnot, it'll be much less time to do it compared to the C5. C5, you've got to obviously worry about, because it's like with the amount of space that's on the C5. Yeah, it's literally a bolted on to the transmission itself. So you can do it. You can say everything's possible. It's just some things are possible with more difficulties. That's all it is. But I think a diff swap would be a big one to make that 4060 feel more alive. And for this 4060, I'm specifically only talking about this from a stock perspective. A built one is a whole different ballgame. But in stock form, that's pretty much where that engine will be, right? Or that transmission will be, in terms of if you want to try to do some upgrades of your choices. I think that transmission can probably handle up to about 400, right? But the big ones, like I said earlier, the big ones will always be cooler, some sort of servo, whether it's the Corvette factory servos or some aftermarket servos, which there are a significant amount of aftermarket for those transmissions, which is very nice. But there are obviously servos that apply more than the Corvette servo. So if you want to go with that, go ahead, right? Shift kits, if you want. Shift kits could be very helpful for any automatic transmission, but especially for the 4060, it'll help it firm up its own shifts, kind of extend the life of what that transmission can be. So, but I'm just gonna that's pretty much all I gotta really say about that transmission, right? Just a little bit of misconceptions, I think, especially when it comes to just when they hear 4060, they just hear a glass transmission. It's a little bit stronger just for those cars. Everything else, they can be glass if not taken care of. You still have to take care of your intervals. You still have to do everything that you need to do. You can do some certain upgrades to help them out. Cooler is a big one, and servo is the other. And those are probably two of the cheapest things that you can do for that transmission. Having a cooler and having a servo can pretty much already right there, that can pretty much help that transmission extremely, just because you're keeping the transmission's temperatures down so those clutch packs don't burn up. And two, throwing a servo at it, you're firming up the shift so then it doesn't really slip as much anymore. It just won't, right? But you say if you guys want to look into it more, that's up to you. But I'm about to head to work here. Y'all have a great day. I'm out.